me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And I want to ask you, you talk in the book during your COVID blues about your life insurance category and how it crashed as you sort of were daily doing a lot of drinking and were in fits of inactivity. That's a weird thing to say, fits of inactivity.
That's actually
You
exactly right, though. That's what it felt like. It felt very like, okay, I've got to get my inactivity in. So I think that's
yeah,
a good,
oh shit.
it's a
I
good
can't. What are you doing
description.
today? Can't do anything. I'm being inactive
Yeah,
from like
I have
10 to
wine to
4.
drink. Exactly. I've got wine to drink and PlayStation to play, and then I have to wonder where the day went. Don't forget that. That
Do you
takes a lot of
start
time.
buying it in boxes at that point?
Not if you're me. It wasn't like I was drinking fancy wine, but I was like, and I wasn't, I would say, how do I put this? I wasn't going through like bottles of wine a day, but I was going through enough that my life insurance category changed.
To category
Um,
4, right? You get
yeah.
this your rate, like, triples,
Yeah.
and
So,
that's like a wake-up call. Have you are you back are you have you switched categories since writing the book and taking up surfing?
well, it's interesting to me because the book has now been out for a week or so, and no one's asked me this yet. And I'm glad no one has asked me it yet because the answer is I haven't checked because I still have to get around to getting life insurance. That's on the to-do list. Um, I think, so and for people listening, so one of the things I write about in the book, when I was about 30, I decided, okay, I want to be really responsible and get life insurance. Then, because I'm not actually that responsible, I waited a few years. Then I finally got around, did it, felt very proud of myself. Then the pandemic hit. And so by the time they do a checkup to see how healthy you are, by the time they did their checkup, I had been sort of in pandemic era sloth for about 18 months. And so the rate that I had been quoted tripled. And when I called and said, why, Scott, as you're saying, they said, well, you were a category one, now you're a category four. And they said, well, don't worry, there's 14
It sounds
categories.
like you're a
But
storm, like Hurricane David. Like he was a category 1, but the squalls are
yes,
coming in, and now he's category 4.
yeah, that's right. And so because of all that, I do think that it was absolutely was a wake up call, though, in the sense of, these are giant companies that make their money by predicting when you're going to die. And so to have a company basically say, yeah, we're pretty sure that your lifespan is substantially shorter than it was 18 months ago, that was an eye opener. It's not the only reason I started surfing, but it definitely, is one of the things that was on the back of my mind through this whole journey.
You say early on in the book that for most of your life you remained a proudly earnest workaholic. What say say it's very interesting. I think if somebody says they're an alcoholic or they've got a heroin addiction or they've got something like that, that is not view people say you need help. I mean that's immediately warning signals go off. You don't usually say it at parties. You
Right.
don't put it in a memoir unless it's a crime. But why is it that people can say I'm a workaholic. I have addictive tendencies towards work. Why are you able to say? And it doesn't. You're able to say that, and it's not stigmatizing. What do you make of that?
Well, I think part of it is cultural, right? Like, I think if you went to Italy or France, or Spain, where I went while working on this book, a lot of European countries and said, I'm a workaholic, people would say, okay, well, that seems like a problem rather than a sort of red badge of courage kind of. So I do think that American culture is particularly we celebrate workaholism. I will also say in the context that you brought it up, so for me, right, this book was not a book I ever intended to write because I used to be a speechwriter for President Obama. Then I started surfing, somewhat surprisingly, certainly to my surprise, and now then I wrote about that journey. When I was in Washington, I do think that DC, and because DC gets a bad rap, and these days I think is going through a lot. DC is a town of earnest workaholics where the workaholism is justified, and I think sometimes rightly so, by the fact that people are getting up every day and working, 15-hour days for people other than themselves. They're trying to make the world better in some fashion. You may agree or disagree with how they're trying to do that, but they have a focus on something bigger than themselves. So I actually think as a writer, and particularly as a memoir writer, that's where I've struggled more with the workaholism because, I think this is a great book? Yeah, I really like it. I think people who read it are going to like it.
Agreed. Agreed. I
Okay,
like
so
it.
we're
I
we're up
liked it.
to we're batting 1,000 on this podcast. The author and at least one reader agree that the book is good. And on top of that, there's also, I do think there are themes in it that people will relate to, yada yada yada. But ultimately, it's not consequential in the way that when I worked at the White House, it was consequential. And so I do think it's a better argument for balance. And I think if you asked my wife, she would say I don't always, even now, take my own side of that argument. But I'm trying, and I think it is important. I think what you're saying really matters.
Yeah, I wonder, you say that sort of the justification for the workaholism is, hey, we're in DC, we're trying to make things better. I mean, to quote the late great Michael Jackson, right? What about the man in the mirror sense? Do you think Washington would be a healthier place if people were more whole? If people weren't as workaholic and obsessive, and if people were, do you think that would change the culture? Oh,
I
it would change
do.
our political culture. Would it change the way Washington works?
It would completely change the way Washington works, but I'm gonna say something here that I imagine will be unpopular because it's not a popular opinion, but actually would make an enormous difference. People who work for government need to be paid more because most of them, and we're seeing this now as many of them are leaving government because they're being forced out, right? They're not leaving for jobs that pay less. They're leaving for jobs in many cases that could pay substantially more and offer better work-life balance. And so you need to pay people more so that people aren't constantly worried about their financial state, because that's also an element of the stress. But the other thing you need to do is also just hire more people in certain areas, right? Not throughout the government. But I think, for example, when I worked in the White House, there's a general sense that everyone did like 7 jobs, and that's not great, right? You need people to do 1 job, and I think that's that element of it, right? And it's weird because again, it's a surfing book in New Jersey when we're talking about staffing in DC, but it is 100% true that one of the reasons you get so many people sort of embracing workaholism in Washington, or at least in post or sort of pre-Trump 2.0 Washington, now a lot of things have changed, is that people say, I care so much about all these things, and I have to do 3 people's job because there's only budget for that if it's going to get done. And if it doesn't get done, real people, innocent people are going to suffer. And I have an obligation not to let that happen. So, and some of it, by the way, and this, Scott, to get to your point, then sometimes you can trick yourself, right? Sometimes you start off doing that and then you lose the ability to distinguish. Am I just doing this because now, not getting enough sleep is part of me? Or am I doing it because sincerely this is helping people? Then I'll just end by saying one last thing, which is that um, when I was in the White House, I got 8 hours of sleep a night because I'm just one of those people that need 8 hours of sleep a night. But I very quickly learned that in Washington, if someone says, "Oh, you must never sleep," if you say you sleep enough, people judge you. So I had to be like, "Oh man, I never sleep," just because that was the only way to like make it clear that I wasn't lazy.
Yeah,
So I do like that part's bad.
you're right.
It's the culture of working too much that
There's a,
that I think it does hurt.
there's a great scene in Seinfeld where they're talking at the coffee shop, and George says, I look busy all the time. They say, well, how do you look busy? He says, I look irritated. And then he just does this irritated scowl. And they're like, yeah, you're right. You look really busy.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. I do think that is true, and but I will I just feel sensitive about this right now because I think DC and people who work in DC are going through enough where like people in DC are genuinely, and I say this even of people who are busy, in my opinion, making the country worse. Um, they work hard, right? Like, I will say, like, around the corner, we don't need to get super political, but around the corner from our house in DC is the Conservative Partnership Institute, which basically is like a think tank that operates behind the scenes, kind of like Project
You know what that
2025
sounds like?
stuff.
It sounds like a really bad dating site. The
It might be. It
Conservative
might have. It
Partnership
might serve.
Institute, right? Like,
It might serve double duty, frankly. But I because but one and what they're really doing, they were creating like a Rolodex of sort of Trump loyalists to staff the whole government. And I don't agree with That's not something I was happy about, but it's a smart idea. And I will tell you, all like the last several years, when I'd walk the dog by the Conservative Partnership Institute, the lights are on, right? They are working really hard too. Now, again, like I'm saying, I don't agree with the outcomes that they're trying to create, but I absolutely think that DC no matter what, one thing that unites it is people working a lot for something bigger than them. And I do think that matters. I feel like we're getting way waylaid from this book and surfing and having a little fun. But I just want to. I guess that's my defense of workaholism.
Yeah, but you know, it's interesting because it does paint a picture of the world that you've been in. That in some sense, surfing offers you some deliverance from, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you do sound a little zen. Like you say something very interesting when you're describing just the sort of morass that is COVID for you and for lots of people, right? And you say, yeah, it's really weird. There's these people that seem to be surviving it, even thriving in it.
yeah,
It's the Warriors, the narcissists, and Taylor Swifts. But you look at your brother-in-law, Matt, and he's neither a warrior, a narcissist, or Taylor Swift, and he's killing it. He's doing repair work. He's actually, COVID. He's living his best life, and he's a surfer.
hmm
And this is something that, and you said something very interesting when you're talking about him. You say you thought maybe that that you would be doing maybe your civic duty if you sort of shunned him for not getting vaxxed. So
yeah,
this is a person that you have some enmity just around his some things he stands for about the way he lives his life, and yet he's thriving and he's a surfer and and you decide in some sense you decide you say like I'm gonna follow his way a little bit. I'm gonna surf.
yeah. I think for me, the memoirs I like to write, and certainly the ones I like to read, they're really stories about change and how the author changes. And I would add one thing to that for when I think about, is this a book? I'm always thinking, am I embarrassing myself and am I changing? And in this case, right, if you learn to surf at age 35, you will definitely embarrass yourself and you will definitely change. And as you're saying, part of that change wasn't just about what happened with me on a surfboard. Matt, my brother-in-law, is completely different from me in almost every way. I mean, he listens to death metal, and I listen to Stephen Sondheim. I jog. That was kind of my pre-surfing exercise, and he's like lifting heavy weights. He once threw out his back training to become an ultimate fighter, and I once threw out my back lifting a bag of cat litter. So we are totally different.
I'm sure that bag of cat litter was quite large.
It was 25 pounds. I know
20.
exactly how large it was. It was embarrassingly small. Like, that's heavy enough to throw out your back, but not so heavy that you can. When you asked that question, I wasn't like, I wish I didn't know the answer to it. 25 pounds, don't know what happened.
It's
And
not massive.
yeah, no, it's not.
It's
I
not.
like, I mean, this is a medium where people are listening, but because we're recording this and I can see your face, watching you try for a moment to try to be on my side there and be like, "No, it wasn't so bad," and then I could see the moment where you're like, "I can't do it. I gotta have
I
integrity."
tried. I
Yeah,
like you, and I want to be empathetic, but yeah,
I
that's
do
fair.
appreciate that. But and so for Matt, he's like you said, he's a surfer, and also, he's an electrician. He was doing really well in the pandemic, in part because a lot of people moved from New York City to the Jersey Shore, where this story mostly takes place, and he was picking up a ton of business rewiring homes. But I also got the feeling that there was something else inside him that made him thrive at a moment when I was kind of wilting. And it wasn't that I said, "Oh, I wanna be Matt," right? I didn't say, "Oh, I wish I hadn't gotten the COVID vaccine," or, "I gotta start to listen to Joe Rogan obsessively," or something like that. But I said, This person who is totally not like me seems to understand something about the world and how to live in the world that I don't, and I can't imagine getting a tattoo. I'm not gonna do that, and I'm not gonna start listening to death metal because that's not gonna happen, but maybe I could try surfing, right? It was like, I think in the recesses of my mind, it was the one thing Matt did that I could imagine myself doing, and I walked into a surf shop and said, "Hey, do you know anyone who can teach me to surf?" And the woman behind the counter said, "I could," and I ignored the fact that she was clearly appending a question mark to that sentence and said, "Great, let's do it." And I started.
I'm trying to picture like what when because Katie is your first surf instructor, and she ghosts you for a little while, but I was trying to imagine what Katie looked like as I was reading the book, and you don't offer, like, a thick description, a rich description. So, could you just tell me, like, what is she tall? Is she short? Is
Well,
she
I'm 5'5", so everyone's tall.
everyone's tall, everyone's
So
tall.
I don't see say
Yeah.
I feel like this is a weird like, I don't see height
She's a
mostly because
giant. She's a
everyone's taller
power
than me.
forward.
Yeah. And I'm trying to like no, she's like I think like she is,
Like, I
like
don't
a
imagine unattractive female surf instructors.
oh, I see what you're saying. I don't know, that feels like a weird particularly because 'cause I'm, like, she still works half a mile away. Um, but,
It's just a stereotype that I think
yeah,
I was, because I'm thinking of the movie. I'm thinking as I'm imagining your as reading these surf stories, and it's the Jersey Shore, it's not Hawaii or something, but I'm thinking like Point Break characters. I'm thinking who populates
right. Well,
surf movies,
the
and
answer is actors, and they're very
right.
attractive.
They're all attractive. Okay. Okay, so
No,
we'll
no, what
yeah.
I would say what is notable and by the way, right, I think what you're saying is you can't imagine, no surfers not being good looking, and now that we're talking over video, you know how right you are. So thank you for your
Yeah,
implicit compliment.
I mean, you're a
Yes,
dashing,
that's I should have called the
journeyman
book
surfer.
"How Surfing Turned Me into a 10," but sadly, my publisher rejected that, politely. So, no, but here's the thing that I will say, sort of when it comes to like, um, that I noticed very quickly is that Katie, I call that's her name in the book, not her actual name. Um, the moment I realized like we are not the same as like physical types, other than the fact that obviously she's a woman, I'm a guy, was when I put on a wetsuit for the first time. And if you have been spending your pandemic drinking wine and playing PlayStation, and then you put on a wetsuit, it is really it's like looking in a mirror times 1,000, right? Because every inch of that wetsuit is just doesn't want to go onto your body, and then the moment it is onto your body, it's basically like a shame garment, right? Like it is the wetsuit is designed to maximize human embarrassment. And I remember when I put on my wetsuit for the first time, and then I look over, and Katie is already in her wetsuit, and she just looks totally natural in it, like she's in clothes. And I'm like, holy crap, like, what am I doing here? Because I feel like I am, just walking to the beach, and I don't think anyone was really watching, but like the idea that someone might see me just wearing the gear you have to wear to go surfing was already one of the most embarrassing things I could think about before I even touched the water. So I do think, I am certainly in better shape than I was, although I thought surfing would get me into amazing shape. The downside of surfing is it makes you very hungry. And so, and I'm living on the Jersey Shore, so you can pizza and the beach here go together.
I'm a Point Pleasant guy. I used to be
Oh, okay, nice.
once in a
Yeah,
while.
yeah.
I grew up in New Jersey, so
I didn't realize that. Where in Jersey?
yeah, in Pittman near Ocean,
Mhm.
near it's a dry town, a Methodist
Yeah,
camp
yeah,
meeting town, like Ocean
yeah,
Grove or Ocean City. So
yeah.
as you were now, I've been most of the places you talk about.
Oh,
And
cool. Yeah.
I live and I love New Jersey. It's great.
Yeah. Well, and for people listening, Ocean Grove, which is next door to where in Asbury Park, something I love about the Jersey Shore, and I imagine you feel the same way, right? Is you can drive 5 minutes or walk half a mile, and you're still it's still the Jersey Shore. It's the same
Completely different
region, and
cultures.
yet it's completely different. It's
The
like
cult
same
the
but different.
Yeah, absolutely. The
It's so
cultures are
cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to describe, I think.
Yeah.
And even the North Jersey and South Jersey and the shores, it's just a very yeah, I
Yeah,
think
and it's
it's
not to compare
fantastic.
it to any other beach region, although the Jersey Shore is the best one, but it's to
Absolutely.
say but it is like if you're in California or in, Hawaii or in Florida, any other kind of beach destination, that sense of, like, you're in a different cultural pocket every 5 minutes, but you're still on the beach, I've never seen or heard of anything like it. It's pretty cool. Definitely there's something the show did not do justice.
So you take a lesson with Katie, it's brutal. The second lesson, you you go to Matt in your head, and you're thinking, if I quit at this point, it's just so great. You say, I couldn't let him judge me like that, especially not now when the vaccine debate still raged and I was supposed to be judging him. I want So I'm reading that sense and I'm thinking, wow, I wonder, is fear of judgment a good motivator? Well, I think it's an effective one. I don't know if it's a good one, but it's incredibly effective in lots of ways, right? It's a powerful motivating force. But I think about like that power of judging another person, right? How
Yeah.
we feel in a position of power when somebody is on the wrong side of morality, or the wrong side of decorum, or on the wrong side of something. That's some incredibly powerful confession you make,
Mm,
that
yeah.
you took some solid, you almost took joy in judging him.
Well, it was I wouldn't say that I took joy in it, but I would say you used a word that I had never thought about when it comes to judgment, which is power. And I think there was a sense of I am powerless in the face of a lot of things going on in the world, right? Powerless to stop a pandemic or stop Trump from reemerging or stop Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine, um, or to stop vaccine related misinformation from spreading everywhere. But I do have this power and I'm supposed to use it, right? Not so much that I want to and I enjoy it, but I feel an obligation to use my power to judge, to express disapproval of someone else's choices. And for the record, and I think this is really important, today, years later, I still absolutely 100% will tell you, I think I made the right choice in getting vaccinated. And I think Matt made the wrong choice. The difference is, I don't think that I am, I would not say nearly as quick. I would say I don't judge him as a person, right? I think it is totally reasonable to render judgment on people's opinions because that's how we function as a society. And, you read the book, plenty of people rendered some judgment on mine and I deserved it. Um, but I think that the question becomes, do we have that basic respect for people as people? And once that happens, people don't take that sense that if you disagree with them, it's not personal because there's another foundation there. But the other thing I would say about judgment that I think is really important too is one of the things I learned through this book. But again, you put it really in a way I had never thought of before, and so I want to go back to what you said about power, which is that there's power in judging others, whether it's a good kind of power or not. There's also a sense of powerlessness in being judged. And one of the things that happens when, for example, I go out at a surf break and there's a bunch of really good surfers, and I can tell that they're like, you don't even deserve to be here. Even if I'm not in their way, they're just like, your existence is pathetic, which does happen in the surf community sometimes. It's that sense
And
of
you narrate it. I
powerlessness.
mean, you do a pretty good job of narrating it and narrating you pushing through
Yeah.
these
But that sense of
it's like being
powerlessness.
in middle school again.
Yes, it totally is. And so that sense of powerlessness is hurtful, it's infuriating. And so I think that there when we think more broadly than the lineup of surfers, but now we're thinking about our society. When you have lots of people who feel judged, whether they are being judged or not, let's put that aside for a second. When people feel judged, that sense of powerlessness and humiliation, that's a powerful driver. And one of the things that we're seeing, and I think one of the things that this book is really about transcending, is that there are lots of people, and it's not limited to one party. There's lots of people who are trying to take advantage of people's sense of powerlessness or being humiliated to turn us against each other, rather than figure out how do we get to a space where people can respect each other, even if we don't necessarily agree about big stuff.
Yeah, I remember one time I watch entirely too many Trump rallies because I find the political theater just the yeah, I just think there's so much culturally fascinating and strange. And but I remember one time he's like, they call them the elites, okay? But you're more elite than they are. You're better looking. You live in better apartments and houses. And people start cheering. And I thought, wow, exactly what you're saying. Wow. Here, it's like it's like when somebody who is a bully sticks up for you, though. Like you become
Yeah.
under the protection of the bully. And that's incredibly powerful, incredibly validating, right? I mean, incredibly. I remember there was a guy like that in middle school, and we became close friends. He was kind of a guy that keeps getting fights and stuff, and kind of a bad guy. But for some reason, he took up for me while somebody else was picking on me, and I felt so powerful
Yeah.
and so safe because this guy, Mike, had taken. And so that I think that is a powerful thing, right? And you know, something else you said, not judging people's choices or their opinions, but not the person. But isn't that almost impossible these days when ideology and identity are becoming fused, right? When people are more upset about cross-cultural dating, cross-religious, or they're more upset about cross-party dating than they are about cross-religious dating, cross-cultural dating. Like the worst nightmare. If we were making Guess Who's Coming to Dinner today, it would be political.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Weirdly, I sold a show to NBC with a friend of mine that was kind of that show, right? It was like, a liberal daughter and her conservative father trying to get along, and was kind of a family sitcom. And one of them, I'm sure they had plenty of reasons for not making it, but one of them I think was people were like, "We're not touching that." That's a third rail, right? We can play with other divisions, but that one is just too much. And I think it's not just sad, although it is sad, it's really corrosive to democracy, right? If we believe that basically we're a 50-50 country and 50% of the country is bad people, then you cannot have a democracy. It's just not possible. We can't live together as a society. And one of the things that, it has just shocked me when I looked into the research on it is how politically segregated we are, even within neighborhoods. And that's almost all of us, right? Like 90, I don't know, I think some number, high number, the majority of people in America are living in a place that, by the definition of racial segregation, is politically segregated. And we choose it because it's comfortable to spend people who agree with us. And I think like, I'm not trying to shame anybody. What I am trying to say is life is more interesting when you don't just surround yourselves with people who think like you do. And I say this as someone who learned this from experience. And that's so I'm not trying to say, hey, this is the thing I know and I'm, super smart about it. I'm trying to say this is a thing that I didn't know. And I'm so glad I know now. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is because, I want to share that knowledge with other people.
Something you say early on, you say surfing made it easier to stop worrying about the news. At one time, I'd wanted to help save the world. Now, I wanted to forget it needed saving. And my new hobby made that possible. Instead of asking, are we witnessing in real time the devastation of our planet, the rise of fascism, and the death of the American dream? I asked, is this wave about to shatter my spine? I remain skeptical that fear was a flower, a great phrase you pick up, I think, from Katie, that fear was a flower, but I certainly preferred it to the cactus of the existential dread. And I just wondered, what about surfing delivered you from needing to to feel the weight of saving the world all the time? What was it?
Yeah. So I think this book, it's a kind of a couple of journeys that are braided together. And one of them is my relationship with this idea of the world beyond me, right? My first book and my first, sort of big life experience as a adult was working in the White House for Obama. And there, what you do every day and this notion of changing the world are linked together. They have to be and they should be. Then I left the White House, and then we're sort of living through this crisis after crisis. And I think that was one of the reasons during the pandemic I got depressed. And ultimately, not to spoil anything, but ultimately, this is a book about how I learned to fall back in love with life. And it's a book about how I learned to be excited about the possibility of making a difference in the world rather than overwhelmed by my inability to fix everything, because none of us have that ability. And so what you read from is, to me, a part where, kind of in between stop in that journey, where it was just saying, right now, every time I'm scrolling the news, it's depressing and I don't know what to do. So I don't want to do anything. And I think one of the things I learned from the experience of surfing is, if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I have absolutely no interest in surfing, A, totally sympathize, having fallen off a surfboard more times than I can count, and it hurts. But B, it doesn't have to be surfing, obviously, but I do think that having something that means you can't be on your phone is super helpful. And it can be something that uses two hands or something that just takes you outside. Whatever the thing is, the fact that I couldn't bring my phone with me, so I couldn't do any doom scrolling while surfing, was actually hugely helpful. And the other thing I think is that it focused me back on my own sort of much more quotidian problems as we're talking about. So I don't think it's great to live purely in the self-centered, like, am I fed, sheltered, clothed today? That seems like a narrow life. But in a weird way, it's also a narrow life to be like, I'm not going to be happy unless Congress does the right thing today.
Yeah.
Because if that happens these days, you will never be happy. And it's a real challenge because
And
that
you
stuff should
control
affect us.
nothing, right? I mean,
Right. Well,
in life, you just control, and that's what
yeah.
seems so great about as I'm reading about your surfing experiences and you trying to get up on the wave and crashing again. But this is we just and your lack of control and your powerlessness, right? But that's
Yeah.
where we live so much of our life. And
And yeah.
oftentimes we're trying to suppress that, right? And this seems like surfing let you lean into that a little bit.
That's right. I would phrase it slightly differently than you did. I wouldn't say we control nothing. I would say we will never have total control.
Right, right,
And we're
right.
all dealing with that problem. I mean, it's fascinating. One of the things that I think if you look at Trump and his psychology, you see somebody who, and he talks about this, right? He's like, he envies President Xi in China, and he says, must be great to be able to just kind of like snap your fingers and make stuff happen. This is somebody who is struggling with the idea that he's the most powerful person in the world. He leads a party, everything seems to be going really well for him, but he'll never have total control. And I think all of us, right? That's one thing that I would say I share with Donald Trump is that fear of not having total control. And I hope that I deal with it a little bit better. But I do think that it's a universal feeling of it feels like we should be able to have control. And so that ability to both surrender and fight simultaneously, that's hard. And that's what surfing is all about, right? You cannot control what the wave is going to do, but you also can't be passive. You can't just say, we'll see what happens. You have to be incredibly active, incredibly aggressive, while at the same time knowing you are not the ultimate decider because the ocean is so much more powerful than you will ever be. And that learning how to do that was something that then I felt like, okay, I can begin to apply this to the rest of my life. Where Scott, when you said, we have no control over what Congress does, for example, I'm like, no, call your congressperson, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to be the call that changes it, but you absolutely should do it. And you can't link your own self-esteem and your own happiness to whether your congressperson responds to your call. And this runs up the chain, by the way. I know members of Congress who are like frustrated by how little they can do these days because nobody can do everything.
Yeah, an agency, right? I mean, you don't need to have control to have agency, right? You can act,
That's a really good point.
and act can be meaningful without you being able to control outcome, right? I mean, the act
Yes.
in itself can be formative, can be world changing, can be
Yeah.
in your own heart, in your own psyche.
Yeah. And what I would say is what I have learned through surfing that I use in the water, but much more than that I use on land, is this idea that it's both, right? That the trying is not like I still to me sounds a little hippie-ish to be like, well, the thing that matters is that you try. Well, not that's not all that matters. Outcomes matter too, but the trying matters not a lot. That sense of agency it's not just a matter of a means to an end, but it's an end unto itself. And the other thing I will say about that is I find that being someone who tries, and I say this as a surfer, but I also say it in my more political life, and I say it when it comes to, trying to show up in general for people in my life. I don't always do it because no one succeeds all the time. But being someone who tries is much more fun and exciting and interesting than being someone who doesn't try. And I've now been on both, right? One of the things about depression and the bout of depression that I went through before I started surfing was that I stopped trying and I could feel myself not trying. And I will tell you, being someone who's not trying, it doesn't feel it's not a sense of release. It feels terrible. And so in a way, the book is, I hope, inspiring to people who might be going through something similar and saying, hey, if I try, I might not succeed, but that's going to make my life better anyway.
I I I I try to listen to some conservative podcasts and stuff just as, I want to hear
Yeah.
another way of telling the story of what's going on in the world and what's going on in reality. And so I listen to the commentary podcast a lot with smart conservative guys out of New York.
Yeah.
And they had a podcast the other day that said, "Why are liberals?" It was called "Why Are Liberals So Unhappy?" And it is. I mean, when you look at research, it is the
Yeah.
conservatives are just happier than liberals, like
Yeah. Well, good.
psychologically. Yeah,
Yeah. Can I just pause you for a moment?
yeah.
So this is not new, right? FDR famously said a conservative is someone who thinks 2 + 2 = 5. A liberal knows that 2 + 2 = 4, but he isn't happy about it. So it's just amazing to me how consistent this has been through history. But all right, let's talk about the present. Jump back in.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So they said something that I thought was really simplistic, but I thought as someone on the left, I thought, oh yeah, I don't feel completely distanced from this. He said, you know what? But you look at the story, right? We all live in stories, right? I mean, we live in myths and stories and narratives. It's just, this is Harari stuff, the sapient stuff. This is just what the human superpower is, narratives. So, the liberal narrative is kind of, look, the world's doomed because of climate change. And we probably deserve the doom because of systemic inequalities and systemic racism and stuff. So this is how, but we got to get out there and do our part. And I thought, I realized they were being cynical and one-sided and snarky, but I didn't think as someone on the left that it was completely untrue. And as I was thinking you're talking about the doom scrolling and the doom narrative, right? Where and something I did take joy in with your old boss, President Obama, was there was hope.
Yeah.
There's a narrative. He was a guy that could evoke hope in me. And I wonder, I mean, does that is there something about liberalism that why we need things like surfing? Because is there a darkness to it?
Well, I think there's a sense of awareness, right? I mean, that's the flip side of all of this is the notion that ignorance is bliss. Right? We have so there is it is true that there is a lot of studies and a lot of anecdotal evidence that liberals are less happy, but we also have a very famous phrase as a society that might explain at least some of that. And I don't mean to say that all conservatives are ignorant or that all liberals are, sort of enlightened, because that's certainly not true. But I do think some of it is when you open yourself to the brokenness of the world, you're going to absorb some of that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think about when I started at the White House, I was writing for Valerie Jarrett, who was President Obama's senior advisor. And she used to quote Rick Warren, who was a evangelical, like a megachurch pastor, definitely not a liberal, but he used to say, leadership is feeling other people's pain. And you were talking about superpowers as humans. And I would say it's not narrative, it's the ability to feel what other people are experiencing, right? To live multiple lifetimes in our one lifetime. And part of that does involve often some pain, especially if we're very lucky.
Yeah.
So, other people are feeling, on average, more pain than we are. Then it is going to bring you down a little bit. And I don't think that's in and of itself a bad thing. I actually think saying, "Hey, we have an obligation." I mean, I'm Jewish, right? We talk about the obligation to repair the world, right? You don't have to
To Cone
finish,
Halom, yeah.
yeah, you don't have to finish the work, but you can't desist from it. You can't just check out. And I think that's an important concept, regardless of what faith you belong to or whether you belong to a faith. But that idea of you can't do everything, you're not supposed to, but you also can't just check out.
But you know
The
what
other, yeah,
where I don't think it's the superpower though, because a dog can feel empathy, right? And they can read human emotions better than wolves or chimps can, but they can't tell a story about it. Right? Where
well,
this is the sapience point, right? That you can not only feel empathy, but you can tell a story that would get people to alleviate the suffering.
so I think it's two things actually, which is interesting. Like, and again, I'm not gonna argue against the idea that a dog can feel empathy because we have a dog and she's obviously deeply empathetic.
This husky, I feel like I
Yeah,
know the dog reading
that's
the,
right.
yeah.
So Emily is, more empathetic than I am sometimes. I will say where these things relate is, no offense to Emily, our half husky. Um, she does. If you showed her a story of a dog that, like on TV, that needs help, she's not like, "Oh, I feel like I'm in that moment," right? She can generally understand, okay, this person might be feeling something. She can understand when she's feeling hungry or wants a treat. She's very good at feeling that. So I think the stories are ways of both building and expressing that empathy, right? And that, I think, is something that is really special about being a person in the world. Is we can, right? You pick up a book and you can live someone else's life for a little bit, but you're also learning about your own life. You watch a movie that you really love, you listen to a song you really love, and you are getting experiences that you could not otherwise have. And I think that to bring this back to sort of happiness, um, I think there's multiple things that one should aspire to in life. One is happiness. One is a sense of completeness, or this sense of, did I get the full range of experience that was available to me? Because I think that is part of what makes a good life. And I think the downside, because I'm not a good liberal unless I criticize liberals by the end of this. The downside for some people, and I have been these people, not every Democrat, but some of us, is when you get so consumed by the brokenness of the world that you feel like you almost have to be broken to live up to your obligations, right? That I think is a mistake. And I say it's a mistake because I've made it. But that feeling of the world is such a place that is full of tragedy, right? The world, I think, in general, is a great place. But there's so much tragedy in the world. And therefore, if I enjoy my life, it's somehow ignorant or callous or cruel. I think it's the opposite, but I had to learn it was the opposite. And I think that's where liberalism, or or what you talked about, Obama, right? Where President Obama and President Clinton before him, like lots of Democrats historically, have always been able to harness what I think of as the best of America, which is the sense of responsibility, where we do feel the pain of others, and we love it here, right? Like, I mean, Franklin Roosevelt's, his campaign song was "Happy Days Are Here Again" in the middle of the Great Depression. I think Democrats, no matter what your policy views are, we can learn a lot from that. And I think people of all political stripes can learn from that, where if you go around being gloomy and then saying, "Hey, join our party," people say, "No, we don't want to join the gloomy party." Right? I don't. And yet, so that's it. The stuff is complicated, but I also think part of what I learned as I was sort of in the process of writing the book was this idea of balance and loving life in a world that's on fire, and that's not wrong. In fact, it's right.
I want to get to your puppy because you have a discussion in the book about whether or not to get this dog. And you talk about you and your wife talking, and you say, uh, adopting a puppy is scary because we don't know what will happen. But just because it's frightening doesn't mean it's bad for us. What if the fear is actually telling us this is the right decision? Have I ever told you when you take off on a wave and you cross the point of no return, it's called going over the ledge? Jackie nodded. Of course I had. Well, I think we need to go over the ledge with a dog. So we did, and I was right. It was the worst possible time for a puppy. That's amazing to me because I think that so much of a sort of self-help literature or sort of motivational literature doesn't talk about fear in very helpful ways. This is great because you're talking about leaning into fear and getting acquainted with it. I mean, did I- did you what was your relationship like with fear before surfing and what is it like now?
So I think before I started surfing, I thought that fear was either something you overcome and you fight, or it's something you run away from. And one of the things I learned as an adult is that it gets easier and easier to avoid things that scare you. If you're, as long as you're fortunate enough to be sort of financially secure or reasonably financially secure, healthy, you don't have to do a lot of the stuff that scares you, right? When you're a kid, you do stuff that scares you because you don't get to choose. What I learned surfing was that I was wrong about this choice. Fear isn't just something you can either overcome or flee, you can embrace it. And we talked a little bit about this a couple minutes ago, this idea of the flower of fear. That sometimes when you feel that fear and you're on a surfboard, it's your body telling you, hey, this is the place where if you take off, the wave can get you enough energy where you can get down the line, you can have the ride that you're hoping to have. And if you were in a spot where you weren't afraid, you're not going to be able to get the ride you want. And that was one of many, many things that I took from surfing and said, hey, what if I tried to apply this at least a little bit to my life? Now, obviously, sometimes in life you're afraid for very good reasons and you should avoid that. So some of it what I think about is being more getting to know your own fear better, right? That sometimes it's the flower of fear. Sometimes it's saying, no, get out of this situation. But the idea that all fear is the same and that you shouldn't have a relationship with the fear, that's the thing that I now know doesn't make sense. And so, for example, the same, with the puppy, right? If we had said, we're in a position where we may not be able to afford a puppy, that might have been a kind of fear that's very different. Where luckily we weren't in that situation. I will say, the first 4 months or 6 months with a puppy, the number of times I was like, "Oh my gosh, we made a huge mistake because of a surfing analogy. This is not good," was high. And now I will also say we have the best dog in the entire world. So, I'm so glad we went over the ledge with the puppy precisely because we had no idea what would happen, right? And I understand, that the puppy is a smaller thing for many of my friends, but that's kids, which I think is substantially more than a puppy. But the idea still applies, where I think that sometimes learning to say, "Hey, this is the kind of fear telling me if I embrace it, I might have a new experience that I might never otherwise get. I might learn something I might not otherwise learn. It might make me happy in a way I might not otherwise be happy." It doesn't mean I can predict the future, but it means I can feel that the future is going to be big and exciting because I'm scared of it.
You talk about, you go on lots of different surfing excursions with your brother in law, and you talk about this one powerful moment in the book, I thought, where, yeah, he embraces you. That's very interesting. Uh, and yet, but my favorite part is this later, towards the end of the book. You guys have this exchange. I want to read it because I feel like it's worth actually reading it like there. Uh, he says, "Yeah, but it was empty. We'll just be careful." And you say, "Here's the thing, Matt, not to be rude, but I've never really associated you with careful." He stopped in his tracks. His expression turned deadly serious. I'd never seen this look on his face before. He didn't seem angry. He seemed hurt. "I'm super careful out there," he said. "If I get injured doing something that's not on the job, I don't get workers' comp." Is that why he's been acting so strangely? I wondered, did I think he was being cranky when in fact it had never crossed my mind where surfing was concerned. The Matt was even capable of feeling afraid, nor had I appreciated how much he had to fear. "You don't have anything to worry about," he told me the first day we surfed together. "You can break your body and still do your job." I thought of his remarks as another example of how little we understood each other. Now I realized I'd been at least half right. I hadn't understood him at all. And when I read that, that seemed, it was an illuminating, as the reader, I felt like, wow, there was a breakthrough.
Mm,
If not in the relationship, at least even though you said you didn't understand, there's a huge gap of understanding over that's jumped over here, and seeing that just how all these how his fearlessness coincides with real fear.
yeah.
Did you feel like you got him better at that moment? Did that change your relationship with him, this interaction?
Yeah, it did. I feel like we were talking about my own relationship with fear before, but part of what I learned is that my understanding of fear as it related to Matt was not at all what I expected. And so much of this book really is about, a lesson that I think we all know, but yet all of us can relearn in life, which is when you assume you understand what someone else is thinking, usually you're wrong. And for not just when I first met Matt, but for the first year and a half we were surfing together, almost the whole events of the book, I would have said this is a book about me, and I tend to be overly inclined to worry and fear, and Matt is totally fearless. And that's one of, we're on opposite sides of this divide, fearful, fearless. And what was eye opening in that moment was saying, oh, I had this entirely wrong in a way that I look back on and say, also a little bit, not um, judgmental, but a little reductive, and to say,
What is that? What
actually,
is that phrase? We all contain multitudes, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly. And I think right, that's right. I don't think I was judging that, but I do think I was flattening him, right? And I think in this day and age, we have this. It's so easy because we say, okay, I know what music you listen to and what car you drive, and where you get your news. And now I think I know everything about you. And I might know a lot of things about you, but it becomes really dangerous and easy where you can flatten people in your mind. And I think that what I learned in that moment was, no, this isn't a book about a fearful guy and a fearless guy. It's actually a much more interesting book about two people who have very different relationships to fear, each trying to learn from each other. And even though they don't know if that's possible. And I thought that was both as an author, but also just as a person, really enlightening and something that I felt like was a light bulb moment.
So my uh, a recent guest, Bill Dershowitz, he's a man of the left and pretty brilliant writer. He wrote a post-election sort of piece reflecting on the left and the culture of the left and right. And he says this. I'll read this to you. This paragraph. He says, "Now look at the right. Make no mistake. I despise the right, especially now, but it is undeniably abuzz with energy and creativity. I am far from the first person to point this out. There is Trump's primitive vitality. There is the heteroglossic ebullience of his language, as Blake Smith has described it. So different from Harris's aphasic salad of nervous bureaucraties. There is the festive exuberance, according to every unbiased report I have seen of his rallies, that he inspires in his fans, in contrast to the fleeting sugar high, the astroturf joy of the Kamala succession. There is the proliferation of philosophies and pseudo philosophies and lifestyle formations and scenes, a Cambrian explosion of strange new species, Silicon Valley transhumanists, manosphere bros, post-liberal Catholic integrationalists, anti-corporate conservative policy wonks, health freedom libertarians, dime square scenesters, maha moms, neo-pagans, alt-rightists, natalists, tradwives, trad Catholics, a new counterculture. Yes, much of this is loony or malevolent, though no more so in retrospect than utopian communism. But that is not the point. The point is that it is alive. And I find that compelling. And having friends in some weird religious scenes on the right, I do think I deeply disagree, but there is creativity there. When I read your book, I thought this guy is alive. And you telling the story of surfing, of learning something in the middle of life that's hard, right? And
Hmm.
putting your body through things, grappling with the fear. Reading the story inspired me. Yeah, it made me think, all right, I'm getting older. What challenges can I undertake? How can I be more alive? How do you translate that to your politics, to the Democratic Party that seems fatigued? How do you take the life force and breathe some of it back into the life force that you so brilliantly and just palpably write about, and it's only drowning? How do you get that into the left's approach to public life?
Well, it's interesting when you were reading that passage, which I thought had a lot going on in a good way, right? The one thing I will say is, I was at the Democratic convention this last year, at Kamala Harris's convention, and the joy was real, right? It wasn't fleeting; it was genuinely joyful, but it was not a big enough tent of joy, in retrospect, to be able to capture other people. And I will tell you, if Matt had said, I don't think we talked when I was at the convention, but if he had said, "Hey, what are you up to?" and I had said, "Oh, this is really fun. I'm watching Lil Jon at the roll call," and I was really fun. I had a great time. He would have been like, he wouldn't have said, "I don't like Kamala Harris." He would have just been like, "That sounds stupid," right? It was just not. It wasn't a big enough tent when it came to fun. One way of thinking about it is, I think Democrats have gotten good at making politics fun, but have gotten less good at having fun outside of politics. And it's weird because this is such a serious moment. I mean, a deadly serious moment, but that ability to be fun is, and again, I like, you can ask my wife. I should not be a poster child for fun necessarily, but I think I'm definitely more fun than I used to be. And I learned a valuable lesson from that. And by the way, I think it's same thing came up in the mayor's race in New York, right? Mamdani's campaign, whether you agree with or disagree with his policies, it was definitely more fun. And you could see young people saying, "Hey, this
Alive
is
and
what it
the life
feels like to
force.
enjoy
Yes,
being part of
yes,
something." And
yes.
Obama's campaign was like that, and Clinton's campaign was like that. And so I do think that these things are not rocket science, but it can be hard to do. The other thing that I will say when it comes to sort of energy and vitality is Democrats have a big opportunity, right? Right now, the party looks like it can't get its act together, in part because you don't have majorities in Congress or the White House or the Supreme Court. So you take L after L after L. Even when you're winning, it's like you're mitigating bad things. Where I think there's enormous amounts of energy is outside of Washington and in new generations of people who are stepping up and saying, no, we're not just going to like give in and say this is how it's going to be forever. And also, we're going to seize an opportunity because, yes, Trump was vital in a certain way, but these days he's very dark. And JD Vance is like the most awkward person on the planet. And Stephen Miller is, some sort of like, sometimes he talks and you're like, are you just a villain from a movie, right? Like, in a way, none of these people are
Just
enjoyable.
imagine Goebbels pulling him aside and saying, you really need to lighten up.
Yeah, I mean, it is like, thankfully, right? Like, I genuinely think I'm very worried about what's going on in the country. I would be even more worried if Stephen Miller could say something in a way where you didn't say, "Oh my God," just looking at his face, that makes me deeply concerned before I even heard what he's saying, right? Somebody who's staring at you that way, they could order you breakfast from you, and you'd be like, "I don't know about this. This is a lot." So I think again, we have a political. When I say we Democrats have a political opportunity here. And I think you see people taking it, right? That is for now, while our democracy is intact enough that this still happens, what you see is when there's a vacuum, an intellectual vacuum, a sort of communications vacuum, people fill it, right? Ambitious people come and fill it. And that makes everybody better. So I think we're actually, I don't want to sound Pollyannish. I don't know what's going to happen and it might not be very good. But at the very least, what I see is this emergence of Democrats who are coming in as outsiders often and saying, "Hey, we're not settling for this." Right? We're not going to be the party that says we would love to do something but we just our hands are tied. We're going to be the party that says, "No, this is bullshit and we can do so much better." That's what it means to love the country, to be excited about the future. And I also will say, I think being excited about the future is due for a comeback. And it doesn't mean being Pollyannish, but you have to be able to run and win on the idea that the future is going to be better than the past. Because otherwise, why would people get engaged?
When was the last time you surfed?
So what's today's a Tuesday. I surfed on Sunday.
Will you
Um,
surf this week again?
yeah, I'm hoping to get out today. I haven't checked the forecast, so we'll see how the waves are. I think tomorrow's going to be good, so I'll be out tomorrow, and possibly today. We'll
And
see.
has your brother-in-law read the book?
Yeah. So originally he didn't want to read it until it came out. And so the acknowledgments, the last line says, "You Matt, you didn't want to read it until it came out. I hope you liked it." Then, once it was too late to change anything, he decided, actually, you know what? Maybe I should take a look at this book that's largely about me. And so I brought him a copy. He was doing a job in Asbury Park, so I drove over, and he's working on an empty house. So I just walked in, handed him an early copy of the book. And the first line of the book is, "Matthew Kapler is my brother-in-law, and we're very different. And one of the biggest differences between us is that if I lived like him, I would die." And I saw him like open that, and he just started laughing. I was like, okay, we're good. And the other thing that was really fun actually was watching him just go through the chapter titles, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that was like that's the time we went to Santa Cruz," or like, "Oh, there's like Le Snake, right? Like which is both of us, like an inside joke between us." And he was like, so for him to be like, "Hey, this is our story and it's reflected in this book," and for him to feel ownership over it was really gratifying. And he said he finished it in a night and really liked it. So that was, lots of reviews coming in and whatnot, but this is the one that really was the most terrifying. So I'm glad it went well.
David, the book is It's Only Drowning, a true story of learning to surf and the search for common ground. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I should be saying listeners, the book is, or viewers, but because you know what the book is. But it's a great book. I really, really enjoyed reading it. Thanks for writing it, and thanks for spending some time talking with me
Of
about it.
course. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.